All right, folks, this is Scott with the Game Audio Institute. Hello out there in YouTube land, and we are doing even more in our wonderful series on audio scripting in Unity. Where we left our hero, he was hanging from the cliff, and the cliff was that we could not get occlusion to work when we went inside the room, right? So we had occlusion going on where basically you get the filtered sort of sound normally, and then when you walk into the room, the sound is unfiltered. So wait, what happens though if we enter the room and the door closes? Now it thinks that we're back outside of the room again because that's the way the door, animation situation works. Let's go look at Unity and see if we can solve this problem. All right, so the main issue here is that this game engine does not know when we're actually in the room. All it knows is that somebody went through the trigger in order to make this door open, and that we leave the trigger, but if we walk some distance into the room, the door will just simply close because it's supposed to, because we left the trigger area. So that's all totally fine in the sense of like that it's working as it's supposed to, but it's not working the way we want it to, right? And so we need a couple of other situations. What we need to know is whether or not we're actually in the room. Well, that's going to probably take most likely some other kind of thing. So what is that thing? All right. Well, probably what we're going to need to do is create a whole nother trigger area for this and be in that trigger area as well. So let's just go see how we can basically deal with that. In my case, I would probably end up basically duplicating one of these objects, but let me just see if I can come up with something here. So this is the door object, and I think I might just duplicate this. All right, there's our door object, and we're going to move it inside here, and we're going to take off all the animators and everything like that. We don't need any of that stuff. We're just removing all these components. We do need the box collider. We don't actually need the mesh renderer, so we're going to take that out. And when we take out the mesh renderer, we don't see an object anymore. We just see an outline. It's not a bad idea actually to have a mesh renderer on the object and then just turn it off, because that does enable you to at least look at the object. Sometimes it's a cool thing, and you can make things look like slightly transparent and stuff like that if you need to. So we're going to basically create ourselves a box within a box, effectively. And we can potentially create a really basic one and not, oops, yeah, that's right, this is bad. This won't work because none of these work well. All right, so we'll just do this, kind of a plain one. So we have just something that we can look at. So this is a little bit weird. We're going to have to make it a little bit bigger. Something like that. And now we have our separate object that we are sort of entered into. And we are going to be able to make this, we're going to obviously turn off the mesh renderer because we do not want to create more mesh renderers inside the space. More objects rendering inside the space. And we might, however, want to make it a little bit extended. So it covers up the entire area of the room. Maybe move it a little bit there. Yep. And maybe make it a little bit more extended again. Just let it kind of get out there past the end of the walls. Hopefully not too badly outside here. Again, it would have to be, both conditions would have to be. All right, so yeah. So that's basically pretty much it. That's okay. And we've got this thing. So we're going to basically just create another sort of trigger area, and that's going to be our room. So we're just going to call this door, and I'm just going to call this room trigger. Okay, so for this, we can create a bunch of stuff. We can basically, if we want to, there are 3 states of triggers options. There's the on trigger enter, on trigger exit, and there is something else called on trigger stay, which is not too bad. And we might use that because it's very constant and we don't have to worry about switching back and forth, because otherwise we have to sort of say, oh, hey, if you've entered this trigger, then you're in the room. And, if you exited the trigger, then you have to like exit the room and, that kind of stuff, and change other kinds of states. So it might be interesting to sort of see if we can not do that, but we may end up using that method anyway because it may just be more useful. One of the issues ends up being is that when you're on trigger enter, you have to basically communicate. So we're going to probably need, well, at least we're going to need 2 scripts, unfortunately. We are going to need 2 scripts because what happens is that when you enter the trigger inside of another object, the on-trigger enter sort of method can't really do anything. You can't monitor an on-trigger enter method from another object. That's an important thing to understand. So if an object is doing that, you'd have to have that object call your other object and say, hey, by the way, somebody entered my trigger. So we're going to do that. We're going to go with our simple little trigger thing. But in this case, this isn't going to do anything except just send a message, essentially. So let's just do that. So what happens in this particular case is we're going to need to create another script, basically, on our room trigger. So we're going to click Add Component, and we're just going to call this room trigger, I think. Yeah, let's make sure that I don't have one actually called room trigger. Nope, doesn't look like I do. So room trigger. And, it's pretty basic. We're not really going to be having very much there, but we do need to have it communicate. So there's a couple of different ways to do this. We're going to use the easy and simple way because it doesn't need to be updated a bunch, and it can probably send a message pretty efficiently this way. So we don't need start, we don't need update. We obviously want our on trigger enter, so we'll go void on trigger enter. Weirdly enough, we also don't even need audio thrown in on this. This is a basic kind of thing. So you would say on trigger enter, but you are going to need an object to talk to. So under public class, we're going to create a game object. We're going to call this public game object. And we can do a couple of cool things. I'll show you a couple of one really obvious. This is like the most overt way to do it, basically. So I'm going to say public game object. Oh boy. Okay, public game object. Let me see what it's going to be called. Let me think. Doorway. Because we're going to be running everything from the doorway script or the doorway object. So we'll just call it game object doorway. So on trigger enter, you can say this. You can do this. You can say doorway. And then you can say send message. This is a very simple and basic way of doing things, and it's usually not recommended for super efficiency, but this isn't something that needs to be necessarily super efficient. So doorway send message, and you can tell it to send any message you want. So you can do all kinds of things if you feel like it. In this case, just send the message, call it in room. And you could also send values if you wanted to. You could send numbers if you felt like doing that. Any way you can do it. But we're just going to say this is in room. Okay? So another possibility, by the way, just here's some alternatives. In other words, saying doorway. You could also, because this object, I should mention this into the stuff here. This object, the doorway is the parent of this other object. Remember we talked about parents and children in some of our videos? So parents and children. So the deal in this particular case is that if you wanted to send a message to a parent, you could just actually say transform, which is the current object's sort of identification, if you will. And so you could say transform.parent, and then you can say .gameObject, because that's what you want to refer to as the game object, not the transform. So transform.parent.gameObject, and then you can also do send message. So in other words, even if you don't know the name of the object, if you know its position, hierarchically speaking, you can crawl up and down that sort of, that parent-child relationship a little bit and go up or down to find objects that you need. I use this method a lot, actually, because it's just fairly convenient. And as long as I know what I'm doing, I know what objects are parents, children of whatever, that kind of thing. So it can be useful. But this is much more obvious in this case. I am going to have to put an object here for doorway automatically. Otherwise, it'll give me a null reference exception or whatever. But, you'll get the idea. All right, so for that, you got that thing, got the script, and that's going to be pretty much it. Now, what we also probably want is, actually, we want to do one more bit in this. It's very easy. All we do is say, do the whole thing again, but this time we're going to change a couple of terms. We're just, instead of on trigger enter, this will be on trigger exit. Okay, on trigger exit. Doorway, send message, in room. Okay, cool. So in this case, we don't want to send that message. We want to send another message. So I would say left room. I left room. Sorry. Left room. Okay, cool. All right, so now we got that going on. That will get us there pretty well. All we have to do now is drag our doorway object right over that thing. Right there. Bang. And that's our doorway. Now, our room trigger script now does, our radio trigger script, our trigger door, needs to figure out what to do with this, this object and stuff like that in order to know what's going on. So when you enter into the room, it should also check to see if you are, if this other thing has happened. So we will need ourselves a Boolean. We will need a Boolean. So we will going to go here and we'll make ourselves a Boolean. And that will be called in room. All right. That'll be called public Boolean in room. And now we do need to give it a method. Oh, yeah. That's right. That's right. I forgot about it. Okay. So the message situation is kind of interesting. The message actually corresponds to a public void that you can set up here. So we're going to call this public void, and it's called in room. So this is a little bit weird, right? I mean, it's not actually sending an actual text message. It's looking for the object, and then it's going to find stuff in there. So I probably should say, yeah, public bool. Yeah, let me see. I'll see. In room. I'm going to call this in room switch. So I definitely know that it's a thing that's doing the switching. Okay. So public bool, in room switch. And that's a public, by the way, that'll be public for the also global basically as well. So we're going to say public void in room, and that's going to be like so. And then our next one's going to be public void. What was it? Left room, I think, right? L-E-F-T room. You left the room. Okay. And, or you could call it out of room. Doesn't matter. So in this case, our room is just simply going to flip our Boolean. So our bool will now say, was our in room switch, right? In room switch is equal to true. Okay. And our left room will be in room switch is equal to false. Okay. So when we leave the room, it will send a message, right, to the room trigger, and it says send message in room, send message left room. So even though these are messages, the messages are actually like a value. Now you can also potentially send a value if you want to using send message, so you can do that if you want to, but this is like the simplest method that you can basically kind of come up with that doesn't involve using extra variables or anything like that. So send message basically is just going to trigger this. It's going to look in this object, and it's looking for any function that matches that term, in room and left room. Okay, so that basically is going to switch our Boolean. And in this case, it's going to say if entry compare tag player, that's fine, no problem. Now what we want to do is we want to say it has to basically function pretty much on exit, because we're leaving the trigger, and that we want to say if we leave the trigger, and there might be another condition that we have to do when we do an enter, but certainly when we leave the trigger is the main issue. So play the dream, close the door. Right, so me closing the door behind you, and then what you're going to do is this. You're going to set up another check and say if in room, then, okay, if we're in the room, then you're not going to go back to the occluded thing. You're just going to leave it alone. You can basically create nothing if you want to. But I'm going to say else if you're not in room. That's nice things about Booleans. You don't have to really say them if they're false. So you can say else like that. And now we can say occluded transition to. Otherwise, we will not hit occluded. It will not go back to occluded if we do that and that variable has not switched. So we'll see what happens in this particular regard, but it should work the way that we think it should work. Let's give it a try. Check for any errors. Oh, we got one. What's it saying? Non-delegate type. Oh, yeah. Sorry, it was in-room switch. That's right. It wasn't just in-room. So that was the issue. So hang on one second. Where we were, we said if in-room switch. Right. That's our Boolean. So that's what we're actually changing. So in-room switch true, in-room switch false, right? Got that? Good. Okay, so here we go. Should work. Making sure that we don't have, you can't see me, but behind my image is actually all the console stuff, so I can see whether things are correct or not. Okay, so here we go. Let's just give this a try.
For the next 30 minutes, in cooperation with the Los Angeles Police Department, you will travel step by step on the side of the law through an actual case from official police files, from beginning to end, from crime to punishment.
This is the story of your police force in action.
Right. There's one issue that we had, and that's we forgot to make this room a trigger. So we can do that. We need to make this a trigger. So let's try that one more time. We're almost there. Hopefully this isn't running insanely late, but we never know.
For the next 30 minutes, in cooperation with the Los Angeles Police Department, you will travel step by step on the side of the law through an actual case.
Okay, here we go. Ready? In.
From beginning to end. From crime to punishment.
And we're in the room, and we can hear our radio.
Your police force
and now
in action.
We're going to go again.
Dragnet.
Back. And we're occluded. And there we go. All right, I hope you learned something here, and the incredible use of Booleans to, once again, help us on our journey into being able to make convincing game audio happen inside Unity using just only Unity's own audio system. So if you like this kind of content, please like, share, and subscribe to our wonderful channel, and we'll have more videos for you. If you have suggestions for things that you want us to do in the future, other things you'd like to see covered or whatever, please leave a comment. We would love to hear back from you and see what you're interested in learning more about in terms of Unity's own audio system. There'll be some stuff coming up, and I'm going to make some little rumor things, but basically I'm going to probably move into doing a little bit of Unreal-based audio at some point fairly soon. So stay tuned for some of that. Obviously, hit the notification bell if you want to see our videos on a regular, timely basis. And also, if you happen to find this stuff useful and you want to support us, you can fund us a little bit on Patreon. Anybody who signs up on Patreon can get any of these scripts that I'm working on right here, all for free. They'll be annotated takes a little bit of time to get in there, but, you know, we'll get everything basically up to date and over to you guys as soon as we can if you're interested in that sort of stuff. At any rate, I hope this helps you get your game audio on, and we'll see you next week.